Well, just as a little way of background, many of you know me because some of you are local and have been here as long as I have been, or longer. Some of you have not been here as long as I have been. But I was born in 1941, and my father went off to World War II in the Army Air Corps, and my mother went off to South Portland Shipyard to become a Rosie Riveter. So for the first 3 years of my life, I lived on School Street, 3.5 years probably, with my grandparents in a house that is straight across from the old school, which many of us went to. And so it was really my grandparents who raised me. And eventually my father came back, my mother came back. It was a fairly dysfunctional living environment. My father had alcohol challenges, and at one point we moved to Wells thinking that we might be able to get a new start in the family. By then I had a brother who was 5 years younger than me, Terry, who lives in Litchfield. During all of this period of time, when I was about 4, there were 2 houses up here on Main Street that some of you would know as Tally Ho, a Hitchborn house, and then the house just below that house, you might know as Shadow Lane. And both of those houses were purchased by Colonel Eugene R. Johnson and his wife Lilith. And they had a daughter, Linda, who was a year younger than me. And Lilith, in those early years, had a beauty shop up on the 2nd floor of Shadow Lane. And Mama, Daddy, Terry, and I lived right at the head of the Cape Road. If you come up the Cape Road and keep on going straight, which I sometimes think people are going to do because they don't put their signal on, that's where I lived with my mother, father, brother, and Diane lived on the other side of the house with her parents. My memories early on were hearing her father's ham radio because he was talking, late at night. I think it came in better than it did during the day. So when Grammy had come back from her first appointment up at Shadow Lane, she told about a young girl that was up there. They hadn't lived there that long, and the little girl knew no other children in town. So Grammy arranged with Lilith for these 2 girls to meet. And so on a Saturday, Grammy walked me up the sidewalk, and there were intact sidewalks then at that point. And Lilith and Linda met us at the end of the driveway. And so that was when Linda was maybe a little over 3 and I was a little over 4. And that became the beginning of a lifelong friendship. So when I was about 6, Colonel Johnson, who I always called Skipper from the time I ever remember him, started a riding school. And the first 2 guinea pigs, of course, were Linda and me. They started out with 4 horses, whose names I remember. They had moved to this town with 1 horse, a beautiful, beautiful horse, Playgirl, who died before I met Playgirl. You met Playgirl.
I rode Playgirl.
I didn't meet Playgirl.
She was my horse. She was a 21-year-old retired racehorse.
Yes, she was. She was
And
beautiful.
she was a pacer.
Yes. So I really grew up and spent more days and nights, I think, in Shadow Lane and Tally Ho than I did in any other one place as I was growing up. And this was through my college years and into my adult years after I graduated from Boston University and came went out to teach in California in Watts in Los Angeles during the Watts riot, which is a whole other story. Back to New Jersey, and then we moved back here to Maine in 1972. Skipper said, would you be willing to work on the docks? And I said, of course I would be. I needed the money, the girls and I needed the money. And I felt like I had just finished a summer of haying and lifting hay bales up over my head. Why couldn't I take 2 ears of a bag of something or other and either put it into a railroad car or take it out of a railroad car? And so I said, yes. Well, he said, I'm going to call you when the next boat comes in, which was predicted to come in very shortly, because I know we're going to have to post 4 gangs, and we don't have enough union workers. We're going to have to call on people from the community to come in. And he said, obviously, he said, you would be the first woman who ever worked down there at the docks. I've done lots of things that they say women can't do, so that didn't bother me a bit. I said, yeah, I'll get paid for it, and that's what I'm looking to do, and I think I can do the job. So he called me one night, and it was in February, and it told me that they were posting 4 gangs for the next day. I should be there at some ungodly hour, like 5 o'clock in the morning or something. It was very cold, sub-zero wind blowing, and at that point I had hair down to my waist. So he said, you braid it, tuck it inside, and wear very warm clothes, long underwear, a hood. You know, he told me all about what to wear. And so next day I got up real early. My grandmother and my mother took care of the girls that night, so I'd be ready to go. And I went down to the docks and parked and started, it was pitch black, I started walking across the railroad tracks with all the other men. And because you couldn't tell in the dark whether I was a man or a woman, and plus that, I had a hood over my head anyway. So when we get down there was a tall platform, and that's where the head stevedore, Billy Frazier, Hartley Frazier's son, stood. And he was the one who would call out names to fill up a gang. So they got the 3 gangs filled. There was a bit of a stir, I think, because there were a few local people who recognized me. And they were ready to start posting the second gang, and they called this one, and that he would raise his hand and step forward, and then the other one would be called, and the other one. And they still had 6 or 7 spots on that gang to fill, and there were 4 people left standing there. One of them was Danny O'Brien, who was a student at Crosby High School, and I knew him because I had been substituting in both Belfast and Searsport. And there was a Trefetheren boy from Frankfort, and I knew him because I'd been subbing in Searsport. And then there was a boy, an older young man from Stockton, Richard Brutus. Some of you may have met, they lived down on Maple Street, as I remember.
Yeah, Richard.
And me. And Billy didn't call us, and he told us they didn't need us, even though they didn't have a full gang. And so everybody else headed down where they were going to the boat, actually. And the 4 of us were left standing there in that freezing cold morning. And not one of those other 3 young men had a vehicle. I don't know whether they'd hitchhiked over, they rode over with someone who was on one of the gangs or what, but they didn't have a car. So I said, come on. And so I took the 3 of them home. And then I went home. And so that night I went down and saw Skipper again, and it was definitely the talk of the barracks that Bonnie Averill Brooks had tried to get onto a boat, and she was a woman's liber and all this kind of thing. And Skipper didn't tip his hand. He made me know that it was going to be tough, but if I could get on, I could financially make a good paycheck and be able to make a mortgage payment and feed my kids. So he said, do you want to try it again? And I said, yeah, I do. So already there was a lot of talk about it at Jeff Edwards' store and the Fort Pownell Trend. And people were either eyeballing me or speaking to me directly and asking me what the heck I thought I was doing. And so the day came not long after that when Skipper called me and he said, Bonnie, they're posting a fourth gang tomorrow. Do you want to do it? And I said, yes, I do. Well, the next morning came, and by then, Bobby Brooks and Bonnie Brooks were living in the Brooks cottage down at Sandy Point that they had been winterizing. And I went out and my car would not start. It was still in February and freezing, and it would not start. So I called Bobby, and Bobby came after me and brought me to the docks. And I've never really thanked him as much as I should. He waited for me. I had no idea he was going to wait. But I went across the tracks again, and by then people knew who I was, and I had gone to school. He was older than me. I don't know, probably 2 or 3 years older than me. But he knew who I was. I have often wondered if he ever talked with his father about this. Or maybe he was having a spat with his father and decided to cross his father. I don't know. Not many people crossed Hartley, really.
Yeah.
But, so at the end of it, Skipper had also educated me about what a checker is. And a checker is someone who stands beside the railroad car with a clipboard, or beside the hold with a clipboard, and checks off the bag that's coming in or going out. And he let me know that they were going to need 4 checkers that day, and that if I could get a chance to be a checker, that would be a good thing. Because basically he told me that I could have been, except it was so cold, but I could be standing there in high heels and a ball gown to do that work. So Billy posted the gangs, and then he said, Bonnie, go in the office, speak with Colonel Johnson, tell him you're going to be a checker. And he did it for one other man. It wasn't one of those 3 guys that I had taken home. And there weren't enough, there were no other people, so we only had at that point 2 checkers. And so I went into the barracks and went to Skipper's office and said, Skipper, the reason I had to go to his office was because I had to fill out the Social Security paperwork and all the things that you do as a new employee of an employer. And Skipper was delighted that I'd gotten that far. And he said, I am going to have to go down and tell Hartley. I've got to take this paperwork down to him anyway, and I'm going to have to tell him. So he walked down that long corridor. There was a door on that end and a door on that end, and there was probably a side door too. And he walked down. Hartley's office was at the end, and he presented the paperwork, and he said, Hartley, I've got 2 checkers, and one's a woman, and I need 2 more. and he's very low key. I mean, he skipped over one's woman, but he felt like he had, because this was record breaking. There wasn't a woman stevedore on the East Coast. And Hartley, I can't even describe how angry he was. And screaming and yelling, four-lettered words. And you get her out of here right now, and she's not gonna work here, and he got up and came charging down the hall after me, and Skipper said, "You better get out and go that way." He was coming from that way, and I raced out that end door, and right outside that door, right to the right, was that great big salt pile. And I went up over one side of that salt pile and down the other side. And I didn't know what I was gonna do, because Bobby had brought me, and dropped me off. Well, there was my dear brother-in-law, Bobby. I'd been his coach at Winslow High School before Jim and I were married, and I'd lived there at that house. They were very close. And so thank God, Bobby got me into his car and he drove me home.
Wow.
But during that period of time, and for some time afterwards, local people didn't know if that was going to be the last time I tried to get on to a gang, or I was going to keep on keeping on. And so there were many times that I could not get into Chef Edward's store, because big men would stand in that door and just not let me in. Same thing happened at the Trend. I got some telephone calls, and it was just, my mother got some calls, and so as I said, I was subbing. I've always had this innate, I think it came from my grandparents, but this innate sense of what's right. And I thought, you know what, I am not trying to make a case in the Bangor Daily. I am not a woman's libber. I believe I can do anything I set my sights to doing, but it doesn't have anything to do with me being a woman's libber. This just doesn't seem right. So during that week, I got called to be a substitute in Belfast, where I saw Danny O'Brien, by the way. But I had a study period, and I had been mulling this over, and realizing that, I've done all kinds of things, and why couldn't I do this? I had worked in Watts in a 1,500 member black student body and not one white teacher. And I had done that for 3 years, and very successfully, loved my job. And why can't I work in my own town doing a job I know I can do? Rights Commission. And I had a long talk with them and told them the story, which was probably definitely much fresher than it is right now, although it made a huge impression on me at the time. And they wanted to push this case. But I went to college to be a teacher, even though I was always promoted into leadership positions, even early on. I knew I was going to teach, and I would never get a teaching job in Waldo County if I continued with this. If I brought a Human Rights Commission case against Jacka Corporation with its big attorneys out of New York and all of that, and I was alone a lot with my kids up there, and on that dead end road, and just for a number of reasons, I had to back off and not pursue it. And so that was in February of '74. Still didn't have a job. In the summer, I went to work for the Stockton Springs town, the ones that drive trucks and clean up road crew. And I was hired at Memorial Day or before to clip cemeteries. And I did, I clipped cemeteries, and by the end of the second day, I was deathly ill and hauled off to the hospital because I had poison ivy all over me. So that was that. I couldn't clip where there was poison ivy. So the mill in Bucksport, St. Regis it was at the time, was just beginning to hire women. I think there might have been a woman from Stockton who might have been one of the first women hired there. So I, midsummer, went over there and applied for a job at the mill. And I went through all the tests about levers and pulleys and fulcrums and so forth and so on. And I passed the tests, and they called me in, told me I was going to be hired. They gave me a hairnet and earplugs, and I filled out paperwork. And they called me in a few days later to come in for my first night in the woodroom on the midnight shift. Now, I don't know anything about mills, but I think that the woodroom may be one of the most difficult places to work. It's dangerous work, it's heavy work. And as it had happened, I had applied for a job in a private residential treatment facility in Camden, and went a physical education job. And when I had applied for that job and went down and met the headmaster, who happens to be right now a resident of the town of Stockton Springs by the name of Ray Hart up in Sandy Point. He was the headmaster, brand new that year. I'd come up from Cape Cod. I got down there, and there's a dorm that holds 36 kids, and what they didn't say in the newspaper was not only were you going to be the physical education teacher during the day, you were going to be the dorm parent at night. So I couldn't be the dorm parent because I was a parent of my, my two girls. So, I said, well, that's the way it is. Well, lo and behold, not known to me, Ray called the headmaster, the owner of the school. They also owned a school on Cape Cod, and they owned one in Ireland. And he called the owner, two owners, and said, we would like to create just a physical education job. We've got a lot of kids with developmental challenges here, and motor activities is very, very important to their growth and development. So the day that I got the call to go that night on the midnight shift to the woodroom, I got a call right after that from Ray saying, we want to hire you. So I called the St. Regis back and said, I have to decline this wonderful offer here. And so I never did go to St. Regis to work at the woodroom. But when I look back on how upset I was and how I just didn't think I had been treated right, really I had been very involved with the civil rights movement from early on, and had been discriminated against. Well, I wasn't in my sorority in Boston University because I tried to pledge my black roommate and my Jewish roommate. And after the pledge party, they told me, we can't take Jews and blacks in this sorority. But, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Can I ask you the gang? Why did the gang have 21 people?
22.
22, sorry.
And I don't know the background of why gangs have 22 people. At that point, I just wanted to be one of the 22.
Okay. Is there anything else you could explain? This is for future. So is there anything else you think, or any of you thinks that it may be important to know more detail about? What I don't understand is that you're talking about 73 and 74.
Yeah.
I was a freshman in high school, and I remember there were boys in high school that were older than me, so I was a freshman, but they would skip school to get those spots on
Yes.
or they would work that night or whatever, and I could never understand the skipping school part.
You can't? I can explain that to you.
Well, I can, but I had a mother as a school teacher, so you just got to remember you can do those things.
I had nuns as school teachers.
And I remember them skipping school or staying out late to get those jobs on there, those few jobs that were available. Yeah.
Yeah, Waldo County was a different county then than it is now. I mean, Belfast was a Depression era, generational Depression era town, and jobs were few and far between.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you explain anything to this, or anybody? You?
The 22?
No, I'm talking about in general. What was going on in 73, 74 that, I was in London, in Paris at that stage. You were trying to get a job as a woman
Well,
in a man's
I was
thing?
just trying to get a job.
Even through when I was in middle school, and I was in middle school in the late 70s, started high school as a freshman in 79, girls and boys couldn't have PE together.
Right.
Yeah, that was never done
But I
in
mean,
Germany
that
either.
was even into the early 80s
Yeah.
when that still continued.
Yeah,
In
but that is still in
in
Germany like this, but they like it like
In
this. I do too.
73, they fired my social studies teacher. I was in 7th grade, and they fired him because he refused to shave his mustache. And
Oh.
boys had to have their shirts tucked in. Girls couldn't wear jeans.
If-
Mr. Daly. Here's the good-looking one.
Yeah, and he had a mustache,
Well,
that thing.
But that was coming out of the service, I wasn't in school.
You came out
So-
in
so
73.
Bonnie was at that time, were the docs ILO, was that the union that they
I
were?
think it
on?
was.
The
Yes.
IL, it was, by that
It
time, it
was,
was the
yes.
International Longshoremen's Association.
That was the first union that came in there.
Right, and you know what year the union came in?
No, I don't, but I know, Dad was in the union most of the time I was in school. So it would have been,
Probably right after World War II.
yes. And a lot of times, they couldn't make their own decisions. They had to go by what Boston and New
Yeah.
York was saying, because they had always worked starting at 7, and when the union as a whole went to starting at 8 a.m., they had to start at 8 a.m., even though it meant in the wintertime they had to get the lights all going before the end of their 8-hour shift. And if they started at 7, they didn't have to be rigging the lights.
Uh-huh.
But what the union bosses said,
So was your father working there as well?
when there were boats in, he was one of the ones who worked ammunition. He started out as a checker because that's what they needed, and then
What was his name, please?
Roland Harrison.
Thank you.
And then he got on the gangs working in the hole, and he became one of the foremen. And the foremen were the ones who also called in their gangs, because each of the foremen had certain men who always worked for them if their gang was in. Freddie Shute down on the Cape always worked for my dad if Dad's gang was in.
Related to Masha?
Yeah, had to be.
Who is Freddie? Your brother?
Uncle.
Your uncle?
Yeah.
Okay.
But The 22 had to do with all the work they had to do. They had to have, each gang would be working in one hole, and they would have to have a certain number of men in that hole. They had to have a certain number of men working the cranes. Sometimes it was just one per gang, sometimes it was two. And they had to have men working in either the warehouse or the railroad cars. So there were so many different jobs that had to be done that it needed 22 men for a gang.
Now, Kathy, when you said your father had a gang, I can remember at various store listings, I would go in, let's say, the train at night, and it was, Tuesday morning,
Yeah.
Harriman gang or Harrison gang.
Yeah.
Were those gangs preset, and what Bonnie was going to was an all-call in case there was a vacancy, or?
Most of the gangs did not have enough union members to fill out a whole gang.
Right.
But they did have certain men who always worked for certain gangs if they were in.
Was that because they were trained in a particular position?
They were ones usually who had either worked together during ammunition, so they'd gotten used to working together, or it was someone who had come in with one of the gang members and been recommended.
There's been favoritism.
Yes.
Lives in Prospect and retired from Sprague a year ago, this past December. Worked down at Sprague from the age of 16 until he retired at something like 62 or 64. He just retired. And he ran the crane down there most of that time. It was a,
I think he was one of the boys I was talking about.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Nixon boys.
Yes, he was great friends with
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Dixon
yeah.
boys. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because Bobby was in my class in high school, kind of through, and and that was all understood. And Mr. Pattershaw had the cooperative education program and all that, and so so the students could have jobs during the day, and if it should occur, the plan was the plan was is if you missed a class like English or history, that Mr. Pattershaw was supposed to make sure that you got that done. And I think he probably gave his best efforts, and probably didn't always go as planned, but there was that recognition that people have to work. And up until a few years ago, I was still doing some adult education, and a lot of times the students I had were high school age, or very near high school age, but they needed to have certain courses to get their diploma, because when it came down to it, they were the functioning adult in their family, and they were working during the day. And it's the way, it's just the reality of such a
Do girls know this story?
They know it, but they know so many other stories about me. That's just one of them.
We're waiting for their book, Bonnie.
Yeah, they know some of them.
Are you going to write a book?
No, probably not. But, I tell stories, and maybe someone will remember something about it. I probably should dictate something sometimes.
Well, this is why we're doing this now. Okay.
We should do it at home when you're just in the middle of ironing or something.
Oh,
You
you're
think this-
kidding.
Is that,
Who irons? Just rattle things off.
was there some point in history when that doc finally allowed female stevedores?
I don't know that there's been a female stevedore. I was very. There was the mother of a friend of Bobby's who worked the boats, but not as a stevedore.
Okay, maybe I'm confusing. She was on a crew?
No,
If she was on a cruise, she'd be a stevedore.
yeah.
Yeah.
The boats would come in and she would have friends. She would make new friends on the boat. One of Bobby's best friends from high school, was because his mother once worked on the boat. You probably know who that is. Yeah. Well, I think the 70s were the kind of perhaps a heyday of what was then called women's lib. I don't think we hear that term at all anymore. At least I don't hear it.
I thought it was in the 60s for some
Could have
reason.
been.
Well, it started then, I think.
Started, yeah.
I think the first women who were seen in Seasport working were women who were on the ships themselves. And they were usually European crews and European women. I think it was
Yeah.
later that they
Yeah.
started having women at Maine Maritime and
I'm just asking, I'm thinking about wars and post, whenever I hear something, whether here or there, I know that women took the jobs from men. And that was a very accepted situation.
Well, they did that during World War II.
Well,
That's
yes,
why my
but the
mother
war
was a Rosie
ended.
Riveter.
You know, men didn't come home. They still had to have the job. What happened then? In 50s, 60s, 70s?
the
Did they
men
lose?
got the jobs.
So, okay.
The women were expected in most cases to go back with their families.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And go back to their familiar jobs,
Hmm.
teachers, secretaries, nurses.
They knew their place.
Yes.
Oh,
Well, I won't say they knew their place.
they were
but
put in the place.
Yeah, I think so.
I can remember as a little girl, with Grampy working down there in the office, that there was some boats that would be return boats. They would have been there, come back and forth, you know. And my grandfather made good friends with a number of the captains. And I can remember as a little girl being little enough for Grampy to hold me in his arms. And Mama took me down to the barracks, and Grampy had me in his arms, and we walked out to the boat and went up to the captain's. I remember tooting the horn. I remember having my very first bottle of Coca-Cola on a boat that came in to Seasport. I remember going there to a boat at Easter time, and the captain gave me a big stuffed bunny rabbit. I remember some of those things.
Yeah.
And Grampy, I think it was at a time when Cuban cigars might not have been allowed. I'm not sure whether they were banned but they would, Grampy loved the cigars that these captains would give him.
Sailors who came in would have bottles of Johnny Walker and some other liquors that they had bought in other countries without the taxes that we had, and they would sell them to the longshoremen.
Yeah, clever. Yeah.
They loved that when that happened.
Yeah. We used to do that with cigarettes and salmon in Ireland. Maybe I shouldn't say that now.
It's okay.
I'm not worried. Anything else? Anybody else? You, young lady?
I left town in 1949. They didn't run me out, it was my choice.
Okay, that's good to know.
They may when I write my little book.
So Diane, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
There was a spring
It was a cistern,
a cistern.
and it had trout in it.
It-
The dad took me and my dad down and I saw him.
Yes, because Daddy would catch trout in the summer and put them in that cistern, and when we were poor as church mice, because Daddy'd been on a bender somewhere, we had no food, and either Grampy and he would shoot a deer out the back window, or we would go down and dip trout out of the cistern.
Are we talking about the Cape?
No, the house at the head of the Cape.
And when I lived there, it was
Where's-
Byron Heath.
Is that where
Yeah.
Paul Buckliff? No,
Where Slazes live.
I don't know them.
It's a beige Cape Cod house right across from the end of the Cape Jealous.
The house that just got sold, that the kids have gone out and decorated and put the purple lights and the bats and.
That's cute, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's
We
that
haven't
house
been
right
there.
across from there.
Yeah,
On the
it's
other
the
side.
house, it's next to where McEwen's used to have their book barn.
Would you know?
John
Right
Harris
about
was
the
down
old
there.
barn.
Yeah.
So it's the next one up from Frank,
Oh, on Main Street.
Yeah.
Here, I'm thinking,
the head of the Cape.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All
In
right.
73, I was just getting out of the service. It wasn't 2 years later that they finally let women be in the same units with men.
Yeah.
But not the time I was there.
Yeah.
It's exactly the time that you're fighting that fight.
Yeah.
And it's just like my dad was in the end of World War II, and he said it was an amazing thing to get used to having blacks in the dormitory. It wasn't until Franklin Roosevelt died and got out of the way that they could integrate. Because he prevented that.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. And Truman came along and they started integrating black and white, and then it was after my service that they integrated male and female. And it's, you know, I was in an Army band. The Army band appeared at Searsport for 4th of July. Now, I still look at this in wonder that men and women are working together in a band.
But in the band, it was easier than other things. There were
certainly.
lots of problems, of
No
course,
question
in the
about it.
barracks.
But it had to start somewhere. I
But
wish
then-
you'd made the breakthrough.
I wish I had. If I hadn't had 2 kids,
Yep.
you know, that made.
But that stops us to this day. There are certain things, either you raise your children, or you have to have somebody to look after them too, you know, it's not,
So if they still don't have female stevedores, you've only come so far.
I believe that there are female stevedores. I believe there are.
In
There's a-
Searsport.
No, I don't know about Sears,
That's
but
what I meant.
Probably
Yeah,
in Boston and
Yep.
New York,
yeah, because
Philadelphia.
we have a lady that lives up on Mount Tuck now, and she's in her 70s, and I'm trying to talk her to come speak to us. But she was one of the first stevedores on the west coast of the United States. Yeah, she lives in well, you would know Mount Tuck.
Yeah.
But Victor Peters' old house.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but she's reluctant to come. So I said, oh, but
You know, I went to Boston University from 1959 to 1963, and my sister Kathy, who lives on Cape Jellison, and she's 11 years younger than me, so she would have, I think she graduated, I don't know what those years would have been, but in the early 70s, when this was all going on, there were these notions about what women could do and couldn't do. When I went to Searsport High School or Boston University, we were thinking about this yesterday when we were driving down the Charles River. And I lived in Charles Gate Hall, which was way over here, and had to walk down to Sargent College, which was at the other end of the BU campus at that time. It was a good half mile, if not more. And we absolutely, there or at Searsport High School, were not allowed to wear pants, no matter how cold it was. And I can remember being a cheerleader for Searsport High and ending up dumped off in front of Mary's restaurant in downtown Searsport, and living in Searsport Harbor, and here I am with a short skirt, cause we couldn't have pants, and walking all the way to Searsport. And you know, sometimes the buses were late, we wouldn't get home till 10 or 11, 12 o'clock, and Mama would have fallen asleep, we had one car in the whole family. You know, we weren't allowed to wear pants.
It was the fall of 1970. I started my senior year. That was the first year we could wear pants.
But no
Dress
jeans, but
dress
no
pants.
jeans, right?
Had to be dress
But
pants,
no
yeah.
jeans.
Jeans happened later, but in the 70s there were no jeans.
That's right.
Till
No
high
du-
school.
No double seam pants.
No double seam
Seam
pants.
pants, that was the term.
Double seam?
In other words, jeans, but yeah.
Okay, I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, but that was.
You don't have double
No,
seam.
they're doubled on the inside.
Oh, here, yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
Girls had to do home economics and boys had to do industrial tech.
Well, it got really progressive when I was in high school because girls got 2 weeks of, wood shop and stuff. We did jewelry wall hanger, a cutting board and something else, but 2 weeks, that's
The
it.
boys have home ec.
The boys had home ec for 2 weeks. They learned how to make grilled cheese and omelets, I think. Maybe tomato soup.
And the school didn't burn down.
But yeah, yeah.
In
So-
1969, Bruce Skakel and I
Uh-oh.
had to lobby for over 2 years to be let into a typing class.
Oh, wow.
I had tried to get into mechanical drawing as a sophomore and was told, no way, that's for the
They were-
boys.
They were immovable on,
Yeah.
on things.
College track kids take typing.
That's
It was
right.
only allowed for business kids.
We
I
did
took
break,
typing and I was in the college track.
They wouldn't let us do
See,
it.
that was it.
we
It's
did
okay.
break in that year, 69, 70.
Yeah.
But there were,
Yeah.
Bruce and I were the 2 token males.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, is a month
skill
later,
everybody needed.
I'm in a unit and I'm the company clerk.
Yeah.
You know what that means? No KP.
I took typing in high school at 61, but my mother probably made a mistake. I was the only boy in the class, you know.
Yeah.
But we had to learn to type because, we were going to college program anyway,
Right.
basically, you gotta type stuff, so
Yep.
it's, I
There
think
was-
after that it was more universal.
I'm a few years older than Dawn, but during our senior year, if we were on the college track and we were in senior year and we had all our distribution of credits ready, we could take personal typing in the spring semester of our senior year, which really saved me a lot because next year I was going to university and everything had to be typed, you know? Otherwise, I'd still be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my son now, so many years later, was told they could choose computer lessons. We're talking about late 90s, early 2000, around that time, 2000. So I'm taking computer, and there is the old teacher. I'm so sorry now for any old teacher. Old teacher who has always given what? Typing lessons. For 2 years, I had a face every time he came home because she didn't even know how to turn on a computer. But they were told that this was for the future when they're using computer. Of course, at that point, he was typing faster with 6 fingers, 7 fingers, whatever he did, than with 2 hands. I don't know what he does nowadays. He's very fast. But it's interesting how also these were problems because there were no teachers for this. So there was no special lesson for the boys or for the girls. There was a time when I started school in Germany, the women were teaching girls and the men were teaching boys. And there was, when there was a mixed class, we were happy. I was happy I was not in a mixed class with all those stupid boys. So that was fine. Okay, is there anything else?
Yeah, I think we should be letting Bonnie get to
Her friend Bonnie.
Bonnie. Yes.
Thank you,
But
Bonnie, very
you
much.
have had a very interesting story to tell us.
Everything
Can
you
we,
say is
can we,
interesting,
what we
Bonnie.
can, what I would like to hear is, I know you were born in 41. This whole thing happened in 73. Is there anything else you would like to, just to highlight? I'm thinking about the people in 30 years who might listen to this. No, I'm just wondering.
Well, I mean, there are, I have a philosophy, it's the philosophy of the agency that I have just finished directing for 42 plus years, and that is that everything is possible. I knew it when I tried to get that job. I didn't think it was any big deal, and I thought that it was possible for me to come out of a little tiny high school and go out of state to a big university. I knew that was possible, but I had a high school principal tell my mother when I was a sophomore during teacher visitation in October, don't think about Bonnie going to school. Her exact words were, she will be knocked up before she gets out of high school.
Oh, God.
Oh, we had
Well, that was good to know.
we had a teacher call me on the phone and say about my daughter Misty, and I'm sure you remember Misty. She was a hellion. She's gonna get pregnant before the end of this year. Well, Misty is a nurse practitioner right now up in Bangor, and you know everything is possible. And you know we have these preconceived notions about what people can do, and if only we had the philosophy that we have limitless potential. All human beings have limitless potential.
I agree.
And I mean, that's why I've loved disability supports for so long. That it's amazing what people with disabilities who've been written off by society can accomplish.
Yeah.
They've got a potential. We need to be smart enough to tap into it and help to develop it.
Susan, did I see your hand up?
That's very true.
No, I was just applauding.
Oh, okay.